In today's video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite focal lengths for street photography, the 85mm. I'll share with you why I love those focal lengths so much and how it can help you take photos that can differentiate you from a lot of other photographers out there. Well, the first thing that may come to most of you is that the 85mm is not a typical street photography lens or focal length. I feel most street photographers prefer wider lenses like the 35mm or such, which allows you to capture more of the scene and include more elements in your composition, which of course there's nothing wrong with that. However, I think the 85mm has its own niche in street photography as well. One of the biggest perks of the 85mm is that it allows you to take candid shots without getting too close to your subject. This can be particularly useful if you want to capture a natural expression or a moment without disturbing your subject. This works great if you don't want to get right into the scene next to your subject, or if you're nervous about getting confronted when doing street photography. I love those focal lengths for this, as I don't like bothering my subjects too much, as I'd rather not be invasive, especially in cities or areas where it's frowned upon or people are more private. Another advantage of using an 85mm focal length for street photography is the compression effect that it creates. This means that the objects in the foreground and the background appear to be closer together than they actually are. The compression can be used to capture interesting, unique compositions and perhaps a more visually appealing image, as it allows you to capture scenes in a way that's not possible with wider lenses. In addition, a fast 85mm lens has the ability to isolate your subject from the background. With its narrow field of view, you can easily separate your subject from the rest of the scene and create that creamy, beautiful bokeh that draws the viewer's attention to the subject. This is especially useful in crowded streets where there's a lot of distractions in the background. But just because you can have that beautiful bokeh to blur out the background doesn't mean you should always use it. Look at your composition and ask yourself whether that makes sense for you for what you're trying to convey in your photo. Of course, there are always some challenges when using an 85mm lens for street photography. One of the biggest challenges is because it's an 85mm telephoto lens, you have to really back up sometimes to get everything you want in the frame. This takes some time to get used to, especially if you're used to a lens like the 35mm or a 50mm. Another challenge is that you really need to pay attention to your handheld stability when you get into the slow shutter speed territory, as you might know from the 1/over focal length concept. If you aren't familiar with it, a nice idea to remember to avoid any motion blur from your movements in your photos when hand-holding your camera is having your shutter speed be 1/over your focal length. So for example, if you're using a 50mm, you would want a minimum of 1/50 shutter speed to not have any motion blur from your movements. But remember, this is just a recommendation. You can definitely go slower if you're able to hold still, which I discuss some techniques that may help you in my tripod hacks video. You may also need to have a faster shutter speed if you or your subject is moving to avoid any motion blur. Just remember that your settings will always be subject to change depending on what you want, which I discussed a little about in my Stop Worrying About Settings video. But despite these challenges, I believe that an 85mm lens can be a great tool for street photography. It allows you to create unique images that stand out from a typical wide-angle shot that we often see in street photography. It also challenges you to think differently about composition and to be more deliberate in your approach to capturing the scene. So that's why I love the 85mm for street photography. It may not be the most popular choice or the easiest choice, but it can be a powerful tool for creating beautiful and unique images. I encourage you to try it out and see for yourself what kind of images you can create with this lens. Many tend to think of it as a portrait lens, which is a shame. But one of my favorite sayings from the photographer Professor Hines is, when you walk into a camera store and you buy a lens, it doesn't say portrait lens or landscape lens. So don't let these sort of common thoughts sway you into thinking in such a restrictive box. Be creative. Use any type of lens you want for any type of genre of photography you want. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more. If you have any comments or thoughts, leave them down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Later.